They must beware, however, of a large cave near the cemetery, for this is the mouth of the vaults of Zen, and the vindictive ghasts are always on watch there, murderously, for those denizens of the upper abyss who hunt and prey on them. The ghasts try to come out when the gugs sleep, for they attack ghouls as readily as gugs, for they cannot discriminate. They are very primitive and eat one another. The gugs have set a sentry at a narrow place in the vaults of Zen, but he is often drowsy and is sometimes surprised by a party of ghasts. Though ghasts cannot live in real light, they can endure the gray twilight of the abyss for hours. So at length Carter crawled through endless burrows with 3 helpful ghouls bearing the slate gravestone of Colonel Nepomia Derby, obituary 1917. With a name like that, I bet it was a Jew. From the Charter Street burying ground in Salem. When they came again into open twilight, they were in a forest of vast, lichened monoliths, reaching nearly as high as the eye could see, and forming the modest gravestones of the gugs. On the right of the hole, out of which they wriggled, and seen through aisles of monoliths, was a stupendous vista of cyclopean round towers, mounting up illimitable into the gray air of inner earth. And there was the great city of the gugs, whose doorways are 30 feet high. Ghouls came here often, for a buried gug will feed a community for almost a year, and even with the added peril, it is better to burrow for gugs than to bother with the graves of men. Carter now understood the occasional tightened bones he had felt beneath him in the Vale of Kadath. Straight ahead, and just outside the cemetery, rose a sheer, perpendicular cliff, at whose base an immense and forbidding cavern yawned. This, the ghouls told Carter, to avoid as much as possible, since it was the entrance to the unhallowed vaults of Zen, where gugs hunt ghasts in the darkness, and truly that warning was soon well justified, for the moment a ghoul began to creep toward the towers to see if the hour of the gugs' resting had been rightly timed, there glowed, in the gloom of that great cavern's mouth, first one pair of yellowish red eyes, and then another, implying that the gugs were 1 century less, and that ghasts have indeed an excellent sharpness of smell. So the ghoul returned to burrow and motioned his companions to be silent. It was best to leave the ghasts to their own devices, and there was a possibility that they might soon withdraw, since they must naturally be rather tired after coping with a gug sentry in the black vaults. After a moment, something about the size of a small horse hopped into the gray twilight, and Carter turned sick at the aspect of that scabrous and unwholesome beast whose face is curiously human, despite the absence of a nose, a forehead, and other important particulars. Presently, 3 other ghasts hopped out to join their fellow, and a ghoul glibbered softly at Carter. But their absence of battle scars was a bad sign. It proved that they had not fought the gug sentry at all, but had merely slipped past him as he slept, so that their strength and savagery were still unimpaired, and it would remain till they had found and disposed of a victim. It was very unpleasant to see those filthy and disproportioned animals, which soon numbered about 15, grubbing about and making their kangaroo leaps in the gray twilight, where Titan towers and monoliths arose. But it was still more unpleasant when they spoke among themselves, and the coughing gutturals of ghasts. And yet, horrible as they were not so horrible as what presently came out of the cave after them, with disconcerting suddenness. It was a paw, fully 2 feet and a half across, and equipped with formidable talons. After it came another paw, and after that a great black furred arm, to which both of the paws were attached by short forearms. Then 2 pink eyes shone, and the head of the awakened gug sentry, large as a barrel, wobbled into view. The eyes jutted 2 inches from each side, shaded by bony protuberances, overgrown with coarse hairs. But the head was chiefly terrible because of the mouth. That mouth had great yellow fangs, and ran from the top to the bottom of the head, opening vertically instead of horizontally. But before that unfortunate Gug could emerge from the cave and rise to his full 20 feet, the vindictive ghasts were upon him. Carter feared for a moment that he would give an alarm and arouse all his kin, till a ghoul softly gibbered that Gugs have no voice, but talk by means of facial expression. The battle which then ensued was truly a frightful one. From all sides the venomous ghasts rushed feverishly at the creeping Gug, nipping and tearing with their muzzles, and mauling murderously with their hard-pointed hooves. All the time they coughed excitedly, screaming when the great vertical mouth of the Gug would occasionally bite into one of their number, so that the noise of the combat would surely have aroused the sleeping city, had not the weakening of the sentry begun to transfer the action further and further within the cavern. As it was, the tumult soon receded altogether from sight in the blackness, with only occasional evil echoes to mark its continuance. Then the most alert of the ghouls gave the signal for all to advance, and Carter followed, galoping 3 out of the forest of monoliths and into the dark, noisome streets of that awful city, whose rounded towers of cyclopean stone soared up beyond the sight. Silently they shambled over that rough rock pavement, hearing with disgust the abominable, muffled snortings from the great black doorways which marked the slumber of the Gugs. Apprehensive of the ending of the rest hour, the ghouls set a somewhat rapid pace, but even so the journey was not a brief one, for distances in that town of giants were on a great scale. At last, however, they came to a somewhat open space before a tower, even vaster than the rest, above whose colossal doorway was fixed a monstrous symbol in bas-relief, which made one shudder without knowing its meaning. This was the central tower, with the sign of Kadath, and whose huge stone steps, just visible through the dusk within, were the beginning of the great flight leading to Upper Dreamland and the Enchanted Wood. There now began a climb of interminable length and utter blackness, made almost impossible by the monstrous size of the steps, which are fashioned for Gugs, and were therefore nearly a yard high. Of their number, Carter could form no just estimate, for he soon became so worn out that the tireless and elastic ghouls were forced to aid him. All through the endless climb there lurked the peril of detection and pursuit, for though no Gug dares lift the stone door to the forest because of the Great One's curse, there are no such restraints concerning the tower and the steps, and escaped ghasts are often chased, even to the very top. So sharp are the ears of Gugs that the bare feet and hands of the climbers must readily be heard when the city awoke. And it would, of course, take but little time for the striding giants, accustomed from their ghast haunts in the vaults of Zin to sing without light to overtake their smaller and slower quarry on those cyclopean steps. It was very depressing to reflect that the silent pursuing Gugs would not be heard at all, but would come very suddenly and shockingly, in the dark upon the climbers. Nor could the traditional fear of Gugs for ghouls be depended upon in that peculiar place, where the advantages lay so heavily with the Gugs. There was also some peril from the furtive and venomous ghasts, which frequently hopped up onto the tower during the sleep hour of the Gugs. If the Gugs slept long, and the ghasts returned soon from their deed in the cavern, the scent of the climbers might easily be picked up by those loathsome and ill-disposed things, in which case it would almost be better be eaten by a Gug. Then, after eons of climbing, there came a cough from the darkness above, and matters assumed a very grave and unexpected turn. It was clear that a ghast, or perhaps even more, had strayed into that tower before the coming of Carter and his guides. And it was equally clear that this peril was very close. After a breathless second, the leading ghoul pushed Carter into the wall and arranged his kinfolk in the best possible way, with the old slate tombstone raised for a crushing blow whenever the enemy might come in sight. Ghouls can see in the dark, so the party was not as badly off as Carter would have been alone. In another moment, the clatter of hooves revealed the downward hopping of at least one beast, and the slab-bearing ghouls poised their weapon for a desperate blow. Presently, two yellowish red eyes flashed into view, and the panting of the ghast became audible above its clattering. As it hopped down to the step above the ghouls, they wielded the ancient gravestone with prodigious force, so that there was only a wheeze and a choking before the victim collapsed in a noxious heap. There seemed to be only this one animal, and after a moment of listening, the ghouls tapped Carter as a signal to proceed again. As before, they were obliged to aid him, and he was glad to leave that place of carnage, where the ghast's uncouth remains sprawled, invisible in the blackness. At last the ghouls brought their companion to a halt, and feeling above him, Carter realized that the great stone trapdoor was reached at last. To open so vast a thing completely was not to be thought of, but the ghouls hoped to get it up just enough to slip the gravestone under a prop and permit Carter to escape through the crack. They themselves planned to descend again and return through the city of the Gugs, since their elusiveness was great, and they did not know the way over land to spectral Sarkomond, with its lion-guarded gate to the abyss. There's this place in Persia that's like the opposite of a sacred place. That's supposed to be an abysmal place. Mighty was the straining of those three ghouls at the stone of the door above them, and Carter helped push with as much strength as he had. They judged the edge next to the top of the staircase to be the right one, and to this they bent all the force of their disreputably nourished muscles. After a few moments, a crack of light appeared, and Carter, to whom that task had been entrusted, slipped the end of the old gravestone in the aperture. There now ensued a mighty heaving, but progress was very slow, and they had, of course, to return to their first position every time they failed to turn the slab and prop the portal open. Suddenly, their desperation was magnified 1,000-fold by a sound on the steps below them. It was only the thumping and rattling of the slain ghast's hooved body as it rolled down to lower levels, but of all the possible causes of that body's dislodgment and rolling, none was in the least reassuring. Therefore, knowing the ways of the Gugs, the ghouls set to with something of a frenzy, in a surprisingly short time, had the door so high that they were able to hold it still, whilst Carter turned the slab and left a generous opening. They now helped Carter through, letting him climb up to their rubbery shoulders, and later guiding his feet as he clutched at their blessed soil of the upper dreamland outside. Another second, and they were through themselves, knocking away the gravestone and closing the trap door, while a panting became audible beneath. Because of the Great One's curse, no Gug might ever emerge from that portal. So with a deep relief and a sense of repose, Carter lay quietly on the thick, grotesque fungi of an enchanted wood, while his guide squatted near in the manner that ghouls rest. Weird as was that enchanted wood through which he had fared so long ago, it was verily a haven and a delight after those gulfs had now left behind. There was no living denizen about, for Zoogs shunned the mysterious door in fear, and Carter at once consulted with his ghouls about their future course. To return through the tower they no longer dared, and the waking world did not appeal to them when they learned that they must pass the priest Nasht and Kaman Thaw in the cavern of flame. So at length they decided to return through Sarkomand and its gate of the abyss. Though of how to get there, they knew nothing. Carter recalled that it lies in the valley below Leng, and recalled likewise that he'd seen in Dilath Lean a sinister, slant-eyed old merchant reputed to trade on Leng. Therefore he advised the ghouls to seek out Dilath Lean, crossing the fields to Nur and the Ska'e, and the following river to its mouth. This they at once resolved to do, and lost no time in loping off, since the thickening of the dusk promised a full night ahead for travel. And Carter shook the paws of those repulsive beasts, thanking them for their help, and sending his gratitude to the beast, which once was Pikmin, but could not help sighing with pleasure when they left. For a ghoul is a ghoul, and at best an unpleasant companion for man. After that, Carter sought a forest pool and cleansed himself of the mud and nether earth, thereupon reassuming the clothes he had so carefully carried. It was now night in that redoubtable wood of monstrous trees, but because of the phosphorescence one might travel as well by day, wherefore Carter set out upon the well-known route toward Kadath and Uth Narga'e, beyond the Tatarian hills, and as he went he thought of the zebra he had left tethered to an ash tree on Nagranik in faraway Oriab so many eons ago, and wondered if any lava gatherers had fed and released it. And he wondered too if he would ever return to Baharna and pay for the zebra that was slain by the night in those ancient ruins by Yath's shore, and if the old tavern keeper would remember him. Such were the thoughts that came to him in the air of the regained upper dreamland. But presently his progress was halted by a sound from a very large hollow tree. He had avoided the great circle of stones, since he did not care to speak with the Zoogs just now, but it appeared from the singular fluttering in that huge tree that important councils were in session elsewhere. Upon drawing nearer, he made out the accents of a tense and heated discussion, and before long became conscious of matters which he viewed with the greatest concern, for a war on the cats was under debate in that sovereign assembly of the Zoogs. It all came from the loss of the party which had sneaked after Carter to Ulthar, and which the cats had justly punished for unsuitable intentions. The matter had long rankled, and now, or at least within a month, the marshaled Zoogs were about to strike the whole feline tribe in a series of surprise attacks, taking individual cats or groups of cats unawares, and giving not even the myriad cats of Ulthar a proper chance to drill and mobilize. This was the plan of the Zoogs, and Carter saw that he must foil it before leaving upon his mighty quest. Very quietly, therefore, did Randolph Carter steal to the edge of the wood and send the cry of the cat over the starlit fields, and a great grimalkin in a nearby cottage took up the burden and relayed it across leagues of rolling meadow to warriors large and small, black, gray, tiger, white, yellow, and mixed, and it echoed through near and beyond the Skae, even to Ulthar, and Ulthar's numerous cats called in chorus and fell into a line of march. It was fortunate that the moon was not up, so that all the cats were on earth, swiftly and silently leaping. They sprang from every hearth and housetop, and poured in great fury sea across the plains to the edge of the wood. Carter was there to greet them, and the sight of shapely, wholesome cats was indeed good for his eyes after the things he had seen and walked with in the abyss. He was glad to see his venerable friend and one-time rescuer at the head of Ulthar's detachment, a collar of rank around his sleek neck, and whiskers bristling at a martial angle. Better still, a sub-lieutenant in that army was a brisk young fellow who proved to be none other than the very little kitten at the inn to whom Carter had given a saucer of rich cream on that long-vanished morning in Ulthar. He was a strapping and promising cat now, and purred as he shook hands with his friend. His grandfather said he was doing very well in the army, and that he might well expect a captaincy after one more campaign. Carter now outlined the peril of the cat tribe, and was rewarded by deep-throated purrs of gratitude from all sides. Consulting with the generals, he prepared a plan of instant action which involved marching at once upon the Zoog Council and other known strongholds of Zoogs, forestalling their surprise attacks and forcing them to terms before the mobilization of their army of invasion. Thereupon, without a moment's loss, that great ocean of cats flooded the enchanted wood and surged around the council tree and the great stone circle. Flutterings rose to a panic pitch as the enemy saw the newcomers, and there was very little resistance among the furtive and curious brown Zoogs. They saw that they were beaten in advance, and turned from thoughts of vengeance to thoughts of present self-preservation. Half the cats now seated themselves in a circular formation, with the captured Zoogs in the center, leaving open a lane down which were marched the additional captives, rounded up by other cats in other parts of the wood. Turns were discussed at length, Carter acting as an interpreter, and it was decided that the Zoogs might remain a free tribe on condition of rendering to the cats a large tribute of grouse, quail, and pheasants from the less fabulous parts of the forest. 12 young Zoogs of noble families were taken as hostages to be kept in the Temple of Cats at Ulthar, and the victors made it plain that any disappearances of cats on the borders of the Zoog domain would be followed by consequences highly disastrous to Zoogs. These matters disposed of, the assembled cats broke ranks and permitted the Zoogs to slink off one by one to their respective homes, which they hastened to do with many a sullen backward glance. The old cat general now offered Carter an escort through the forest to whatever border he wished to reach, deeming it likely that the Zoogs would harbor dire resentment against him for the frustration of their warlike enterprise. This offer he welcomed with gratitude, not only for the safety it afforded, but because he liked the graceful companionship of cats. So, in the midst of a pleasant and playful regiment, relaxed after the successful performance of its duty, Randolph Carter walked with dignity through that enchanted and phosphorescent wood of Titan trees, talking of his quest with the old general and his grandson, whilst others of the band indulged in fantastic gambols or chased fallen leaves that the wind drove among the fungi of that primeval floor. And the old cat said that he had heard much of the unknown Kadath in the cold waste, but did not know where it was. As for the marvelous Sunset City, he had not even heard of that, but would gladly relay to Carter anything he might later learn. He gave the seeker some passwords of great value among the cats of Dreamland, and commended him, especially, to the old chief of the cats in Kadath, whither he was bound. That old cat, already slightly known to Carter, was a dignified Maltese, and would prove highly influential in any transaction. It was dawn when they came to the proper edge of the wood, and Carter bade his friends a reluctant farewell. The young sub-lieutenant he had met as a small kitten would have followed him had not the old general forbidden it. But that austere patriarch insisted that the path of duty lay with the tribe and the army. So Carter set out alone over the golden fields that stretched mysterious beside a willow-fringed river, and the cats went back into the wood. Well did the traveler know that those garden lands that lie betwixt the wood of the Crenanarian Sea, and likely did he follow the singing river of Aukranas that marked his course, and the sun rose higher over the gentle slopes of grove and lawn, and heightened the colors of thousand flowers that starred each knoll and dingle. A blazed haze lies upon all this region, wherein is a little held more of the sunlight than other places hold, and a little more of the summer's humming music of birds and bees, so that men walk through it as through a fiery place, and feel greater joy and wonder than they ever afterward remember. By noon, Carter reached the jasper terraces of Kiran, which slope down to the river's edge and bear that temple of loveliness, wherein the king of Elekvad comes from his far realm on the twilight sea once a year in golden palanquin to pray to the entity of Aukranas, who sang to him in youth when he dwelt in a cottage by its banks. All of Jasper is that temple, and covering an acre of ground with its walls and courts, its 7 pinnacled towers, and its inner shrine, where the river enters through hidden channels, and the entity sings softly in the night. Many times the moon hears strange music as it shines on those courts and terraces and pinnacles, but whether that music is the song of the entity or the chant of the cryptical priest, none but the king of Elekvad may say, for only he had entered the temple or had seen the priests. Now, in the drowsiness of the day, the caravan and delicate thane was silent, and Carter heard only the murmur of the great stream and the hum of the birds and bees as he walked onward under the enchanted sun. All that afternoon the pilgrim wandered on through perfumed meadows and in the lee of gentle riverward hills, bearing peaceful thatched cottages and the shrines of amiable entities carven from jasper or chrysoberyl. Sometimes he walked close to the bank of Aukranas and whistled to the sprightly and iridescent fish of that crystal stream, and at other times he paused amidst the whispering rushes and gazed at the dark wood on the farther side, whose trees came down clear to the water's edge. In former dreams he had seen quaint lumbering buopoths come shyly out of that wood to drink, but now he could not glimpse any. Once in a while he paused to watch a carnivorous fish catching a fishing bird, which it lured to the water by showing its tempting scales in the sun. and grasped by the beak with its enormous mouth, as the winged hunter sought to dart down upon it. Toward evening he mounted a low grassy rise, and saw before him, aflaming in the sunset, the 1,000 gilded spires of Thrawn. Lofty beyond belief are the alabaster walls of that incredible city, sloping inward toward the top and wrought in one solid piece by what means no man knows, for they are more ancient than memory. Yet lofty as they are, with their 100 gates and 200 turrets, the clustered towers within, all white beneath their golden spires, are loftier still, so that men on the plain around see them soaring into the sky, sometimes shining, sometimes caught at the top of tangles of cloud and mist, and sometimes clouded lower down, with their utmost pinnacles blazing free above the vapors. And where Thrawn's gates open on the river are great wharves of marble, with ornate galleons of fragrant cedar and calamander riding gently at anchor, and strangely bearded sailors sitting on casks and bales, with the hieroglyphs of far places. Landward beyond the walls lies the farm country, where small white cottages dream between little hills, and narrow roads with many stone bridges wind gracefully among the streams and gardens. Down through this verdant land Carter walked at evening, and saw twilight float up from the river to the marvelous golden spires of Thrawn. And just at the hour of dusk he came to the southern gate, and was stopped by a red-robed sentry, till he had told 3 dreams beyond belief, and proved himself a dreamer worthy to walk up Thran's steep, mysterious streets, and linger in the bazaars where the wares of the ornate galleons were sold. Then into that incredible city he walked, through a wall so thick that the gate was a tunnel, and thereafter, amidst curved and undulated ways, winding deep and narrow between the heavenward towers. Light shone through the grated and balconied windows, and the sound of lutes and pipes stole timid from inner courts where marble fountains bubbled. Carter knew his way, and edged down through darker streets to the river, where, at an old sea tavern, he found the captains and seamen he had known in myriad other dreams. There he bought his passage to Kadath on a great green galleon, and there he stopped for the night, after speaking gravely the venerable cat of that inn, who blinked, dozing, before an enormous hearth, and dreamed of old wars and forgotten entities. In the morning Carter boarded the galleon bound for Kadath, and set in the prow as the ropes were cast off, and the long sail down the Carinarian Sea begun.